Every few years, the Ebola virus emerges from the jungle and crosses from animals to humans. A potentially deadly threat, first identified back in 1976. An expedition to the forests of Congo was investigating a mysterious illness. The virus was discovered by a scientist, Peter Pio, and he's now appalled that it's still causing outbreaks.
Well, it's very sad that this is happening again, that we haven't learned the lessons from the past, where through very simple measures we can control this epidemic. But I understand it because people in West Africa have never been exposed to it. Some even don't believe that Ebola exists.
Once inside the human body, the virus causes internal bleeding, and because it's carried by bodily fluids, it can be passed among families or to people handling the victims. With a high rate of fatalities, Ebola is very dangerous, but there are limits to its spread. The virus is far less contagious than flu, for example, or SARS. You need to be very close to victims to become infected. There's also some natural immunity. About 10% of people in Africa and more here in Britain have a genetic trait that helps fight the virus. And outbreaks can be contained. Dozens have been shut down in recent years. It all depends on enforcing tough controls on hygiene.
Ebola, like all viruses, can be absolutely contained by quarantine. That's the one universally effective antiviral. So essentially, if you have the virus, they can lock you away in a room. It won't necessarily make you better, and there are no treatments for Ebola, but it protects the rest of the world by preventing the spread of the infection.
A lab on the front line in West Africa. But what if the virus goes further? If someone infected flies to Britain? This was explored today by the government's emergency committee, COBRA. But airlines and health authorities are watching closely, so the risks are said to be very low. The challenge is in Africa. Tonight, Liberia closed all of its schools. Desperate measures till Ebola is stopped. David Schuckman, BBC News.
The World Health Organization calls it an extraordinary event, the most severe Ebola outbreak ever, and it says there must be a coordinated international response to stop and reverse its spread.
The committee's conclusions and my decisions are a clear call for international solidarity. Countries affected to date simply do not have the capacity to manage an outbreak of this size and complexity on their own.
The official statistics say 932 people have died so far, and that number will rise. Guinea, Liberia and Sierra Leone are the countries most affected. In Liberia, troops at roadblocks trying to halt the spread of Ebola. The WHO wants all the affected countries to declare national emergencies. But they've been plagued by civil unrest. Their health services are weak and inexperienced. And here in Guinea, a sick man is left to lie in the street for hours. The WHO says fear, both in the countries already affected and in the wider world, is one of the major challenges. So it's not calling for a general ban on international travel or trade. All governments need to be vigilant and ready, it suggests, but the main focus of concern remains West Africa.
The outbreak will definitely be brought under control, but when that will occur, I don't think that any of us can second guess. This is an immensely challenging, difficult, and I think a little bit unpredictable outbreak.
The affected countries urgently need more specialist equipment and trained personnel. But with no proven vaccine, should international aid also include experimental drugs?
I think there's a very good humanitarian case for using these drugs, but we don't really know enough about whether they'll work or how they work to be sure we can rely on them. And it's also going to take a considerable amount of time to make enough of these drugs to treat affected people.
The WHO itself has limited resources. It wants its move now to galvanise governments and agencies in the affected region and beyond. Nick Childs, BBC News. They've stepped up airport health checks in Nigeria as international alarm grows over the worst outbreak of the deadly Ebola virus since it was discovered nearly 4 decades ago. With concern that this health crisis is spinning out of control, the World Health Organization is holding an emergency meeting. It could declare a global health emergency, imposing travel bans and border controls on affected countries. But some say more should have been done earlier.
On several occasions we have repeated that the epidemic is far from being controlled, and I think today, unfortunately, we are very far from controlling it.
This most deadly Ebola outbreak has so far affected 4 countries in West Africa: Guinea, Sierra Leone, Liberia and now Nigeria. The death rate from the current outbreak is estimated at 50 to 60%. Almost 900 people have died. The Ebola outbreak has even intruded on a US-Africa summit this week in Washington.
And let me welcome the delegations from Sierra Leone, Liberia and Guinea, with whom we are working so urgently to control the Ebola outbreak and whose citizens are in our thoughts and prayers today.
Both the American aid workers who contracted Ebola in Liberia have now been flown home for treatment. It's reported 3 Spanish missionaries in Liberia have also now tested positive. But the Americans appear to be improving after receiving an experimental drug.
The company is trying to scale up on the production. It's difficult to produce these particular types of antibody cocktails, and it's not at the level of being able to mass produce.
British Airways has said it's suspending its flights to and from Sierra Leone and Liberia for the rest of this month. In Europe and the United States, the authorities and airlines are monitoring this outbreak closely. The risk of transmission here is said to be very low. And Ebola is containable, but the countries currently affected urgently need more outside help to prevent this becoming an even bigger crisis in the region. Nick Childs, BBC News.
An Ebola epidemic was declared in Guinea-Conakry on March 22nd. This is the first time that the virus has been detected in the country. MSF has set up an isolation facility for suspected cases in Guékidou and is preparing to do the same in Macenta. Both cities are in the region of Guinea Forestière in the southern part of the country. The Ministry of Health has recorded nearly 90 suspected cases to date, including approximately 60 deaths. Ebola is a rare but serious illness and is often deadly. Ebola spreads quickly through direct contact with infected individuals or animals. There is no treatment for the Ebola fever, and it is fatal in 25 to 90% of cases. The Ebola virus causes a raging fever, headaches, muscle pain, conjunctivitis, and general weakness. The next phase involves vomiting, diarrhea, and sometimes a rash.
L'Ebola est très contagieux. L'Ebola est contagieux par les fluides d'un patient avec l'Ebola. C'est pour ça qu'on doit éviter d'être en contact avec le fluide d'un patient. Donc le fluide, ça veut dire le vomissement, la diarrhée, le sang, la salive, le sueur. Donc pour nous protéger, on a des vêtements spéciaux. Donc on a tout. On a des boots, on a le pantalon comme ça, on a le apron, on a le masque, parce que quand tu parles avec un patient et il y a des salives, c'est aussi très contagieux, donc c'est pour ça qu'on a le masque. On a deux paires de gants, un normal et un surgical. Et aussi après on doit mettre le Google. Et après nous sommes prêts à entrer.
Although there is no cure for this disease, we can reduce its very high mortality by addressing the symptoms. For example, we put patients who are dehydrated from diarrhea on a drip. We give patients vitamins and pain medication, especially when we are dealing with a hopeless case. At this point, we ease the patient's pain and stay with him until the end.
C'est très difficile de voir la souffrance des patients sans pouvoir faire quelque chose. C'est très difficile de voir les patients mourir.
Together with the local community, MSF is also focusing on tracing people who may have been infected by contact with already identified patients. Affected communities must also be informed about the illness and the precautions to be taken to limit risks of contamination. Basic hygiene, such as washing one's hands, can greatly reduce the risk of transmission.
It's one of the most lethal infectious diseases known to man, and now Guinean Health Minister Remy Lamar has confirmed cases of Ebola in the capital, the victims in quarantine. The spread of the virus to Conakry, a city of some 2 million people, marks an escalation in the outbreak, which until now was confined to rural areas. By Wednesday, 63 deaths had been reported from suspected cases in the country's remote southeast. Lamar said the virus appeared to have been transmitted by an old man who showed signs of hemorrhagic fever after visiting Central Guinea. At least 6 more people have died in Sierra Leone and Liberia from Ebola-like symptoms, most of them after crossing over from Guinea. There's no cure or vaccine, partly because the rarity of the disease makes drug development difficult.
There is no vaccination, there is no medicine. So the only way to fight Ebola is cleanliness and cutting off the chain of transmission, meaning detecting the disease rapidly and the people infected, then isolating them so the disease stops by itself and goes back to the forest.
But Guinea's few hospitals are ill-equipped to deal with the virus. The country's turned to medical charities and UN agencies for help. At the weekend, medical charity Doctors Without Borders flew in 33 tons of supplies. Foreign ministers from across West Africa have branded the outbreak a serious threat to regional security, appealing for international assistance to control the epidemic. Professor Muyembe says it's high time a suitable vaccination was made for what's one of the world's most potent viruses, which spreads and kills with devastating speed.
The problem with finding a vaccine is the cost, and it's a disease of poor countries. Many vaccinations for Africa is not profitable, so it's still taking a long time. But you're certainly getting to the point where we need these vaccinations to save Africa.
Experts say Ebola's suspected origin is forest bats. In an effort to halt the transmission of the disease, Guinea and neighbouring countries have banned consumption of bat and other forms of bushmeat, a regional delicacy. Guinea has also forbidden public funerals for victims and bodies being disposed of by the Red Cross. Regional airline Gambia Bird has announced that it will delay the launch of services to Conakry, due to start on Sunday because of the outbreak. Clementine Logan, CCTV.
Nigerian health authorities raced to stop the spread of Ebola on Saturday after a man sick with one of the world's deadliest diseases brought it by plane to Lagos, Africa's largest city with 21 million people. The fact that the traveler from Liberia could board an international flight also raised new fears that other passengers could take the disease beyond Africa due to the weak inspection of passengers and the fact that Ebola's symptoms are similar to other diseases. Officials in the country of Togo, where the sick man's flight had a stopover, also went on high alert after learning that Ebola could possibly have spread to a fifth country. Ebola had already caused some 672 deaths across a wide swath of West Africa before the Nigeria case was announced. It is the deadliest outbreak on record for Ebola, and now it threatens Nigeria, Africa's most populous nation. An outbreak in Lagos, Africa's megacity, where many lived in cramped conditions, could be a major disaster. Nigerian newspapers described the effort as a scramble to contain the threat after the Liberian arrived in Lagos and then died on Friday.
The first 2 cases of Ebola have been confirmed in Liberia, after spreading from neighboring Guinea, where the deadly virus has killed 78 people. The 2 Liberian cases are sisters, one of whom had recently returned from Guinea. Officials say, as concern grows over the outbreak, Senegal has closed its normally busy border with Guinea. Ebola is spread by close contact and kills between 25% and 90% of its victims. Senegalese singer Youssou N'Dour cancelled Saturday's concert in Guinea's capital Conakry because of the outbreak. Although he had already traveled to Conakry, he told the BBC it would not be a good idea to bring hundreds or thousands of people together in an enclosed area. The outbreak began in Guinea's remote southeastern forest region but last week spread to the capital, a sprawling city of 2 million. Senegal's health minister Marie Kalsek said the government decided to close its border with Guinea after confirmation the virus had reached Conakry. When it used to be only in the south of Guinea, we didn't do anything special. But now that it's reached Conakry, we believe it's safer to close our borders, she said. We have also closed all weekly markets, known as Luma, in the south. And we're having some discussions with religious leaders regarding big religious events. There have also been suspected cases of Ebola in neighboring Sierra Leone, but these have not been confirmed. The outbreak is believed to have spread to humans from fruit bats, which are a delicacy in parts of southeastern Guinea. The government has now banned the sale and consumption of the bats. It has also urged people to ensure they regularly wash their hands with soap to prevent the virus from spreading. Discovered in 1976 after an outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo, then Zaire, Ebola causes a severe hemorrhagic fever where victims suffer vomiting, diarrhea and both internal and external bleeding. Scientists have yet to develop an effective drug or vaccine to fight it. Outbreaks of Ebola occur primarily in remote villages in Central and West Africa, near tropical rainforests, the World Health Organization says.
Of all the places to loot, an Ebola isolation clinic probably isn't the best place. Armed protesters stormed an Ebola clinic in Liberia's capital Saturday, stealing blood-stained bedding and forcing as many as 20 infected patients to flee into the city's tightly packed West Point township. According to the United Nations Integrated Regional Information Networks, or IRIN, the West Point shantytown has about 70,000 residents and suffers from debilitating sanitary conditions. The population has access to only 4 public toilets, meaning street defecation is commonplace. There are now fears that with West Point's dense neighborhoods, poor sanitary conditions, and the Ebola patients now on the loose, it could make fighting Liberia's already serious Ebola outbreak even more complex. A senior Liberia police official told the BBC this is one of the stupidest things I have ever seen in my life, and that the looting of blood-stained mattresses and bedding could spread the virus to all of West Point. Sky News reports West Point residents were already upset that Ebola patients were being brought from other parts of the capital to the isolation clinic in their township. The protesters were reportedly shouting that Ebola was a scam created by the Liberian president for money. According to Front Page Africa, the assistant health minister said Thursday there are plans to quarantine West Point, but first, food and supplies must be brought into the township. While West Point wouldn't be the first place to be quarantined by the Liberian government, it might be the largest if the health ministry does decide to quarantine the area. The West Point clinic looting came the same day the Kenyan government announced a travel ban on West African countries afflicted with the deadly Ebola virus. Kenya Airways, which is owned by the Kenyan government, announced that flights going to and from Liberia and Sierra Leone will be suspended starting Tuesday at midnight. Nonetheless, the World Health Organization, or WHO, reiterated that transmission rates of Ebola through air travel are very low and has advised against travel bans. According to the WHO, more than 400 people have died in Liberia from Ebola, and more than 1,100 in total between Liberia, Guinea, Nigeria, and Sierra Leone. For Newsium, Zach Toombs.
Congo's health minister says 2 Ebola deaths have been confirmed in the Central African country. Felix Kabange-Numbi said Sunday that 2 of 8 samples from the northwest Equateur province came back positive for the deadly disease. Numbi said the samples were from the region where the World Health Organization said an outbreak of hemorrhagic gastroenteritis has killed 70 people in recent weeks. The WHO said last week those deaths were not Ebola-related. Numbi said Congolese officials believed Ebola had killed 13 people in the region, including 5 health workers. He said 11 people were sick and in isolation and that 80 contacts were being traced. He said the infections were of a different strain than those in the outbreak in West Africa that has killed more than 1,400 people.
Between August 19th and August 20th, WHO reported 142 new cases of Ebola and 77 new deaths. Meanwhile, the Democratic Republic of Congo claims that 2 people died from what is believed to be a different strain of the virus over the weekend. While Ebola may be lethal, fear and ignorance are the more silent killers in the current outbreak in West Africa. Some airlines and shipping companies have stopped service to West Africa altogether, causing supply shortages and worsening conditions in Ebola-infected areas. The governments of Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Guinea have implemented quarantines on major cities with infected residents, further isolating the victims from help. Patients can't get to the doctors, and many doctors aren't going to the patients. Fear of infection by health workers who live abroad and the limited expertise of local practitioners has limited the number of doctors willing and able to treat those infected. There's some good news, however. Both American patients being treated for Ebola were released on August 21st, fully recovered from the disease.
I'm thrilled to be alive, to be well, and to be reunited with my family.
Despite scares in Germany, the US, Saudi Arabia, Spain, France, UK, and Thailand, no cases have been confirmed outside of Nigeria, Sierra Leone, Guinea, and Liberia. And while the rest of the world may be thinking about closing off their borders, they are opening up their wallets. China has donated $4.9 million, the UK $8 million, the EU and the US are in for $15.8 million each. The African Development Bank is contributing a whopping $56 million. The WHO continues to spread the word on Twitter in an attempt to stop the spread of rumors just as deadly as the disease.
The deadly Ebola outbreak gripping West Africa has now registered a case in Senegal. A young man from Guinea has become the country's first official victim of the virus. He's since been placed in quarantine, but the case will further worry international observers who fear the contagion of this crisis. Originating in Guinea, Sierra Leone, Liberia and Nigeria have also seen the virus cross their borders. Over 1,500 people have been killed by the current outbreak, but the World Health Organization stresses that 20,000 people are at risk of infection. Panic is rife in the region, with a riot breaking out in Guinea's second largest city after a market was sprayed with disinfectant. A visiting US official has warned of the need for containment.
If we don't stop it here, we're going to be dealing with it for years around the world, but we can still stop it.
A number of major pharmaceutical companies are now planning to test experimental Ebola treatments on humans. The World Health Organization has opened the door for those infected in this epidemic to be offered fast-track drugs.
We live in an interconnected and increasingly globalized world. Thanks to international jet travel, people and the diseases they carry can be in any city on the planet in a matter of hours. And once the virus touches down, sometimes all it takes is one sneeze to spread the infection throughout the community. When humans were hunter-gatherers roaming the wild savannas, we were never in one place long enough, and settlements were not large enough to sustain the transmission of infectious microbes. But with the advent of the agricultural revolution 10,000 years ago, and the arrival of permanent settlements in the Middle East, people began living side by side with animals, facilitating the spread of bacteria and viruses between cattle and humans. Epidemics and pandemics come in many shapes and forms. In 2010, for instance, a devastating earthquake struck Haiti, forcing thousands of people into temporary refugee camps. Within weeks, the camps have become breeding grounds for cholera, a bacteria spread by contaminated water, triggering a countrywide epidemic. But the most common cause of epidemics are viruses such as measles, influenza, and HIV. And when they go global, we call them pandemics. Pandemics have occurred throughout human history. Some have left scars on the tissue and bone of their victims, while evidence for others comes from preserved DNA. For instance, scientists have recovered DNA from the bacteria that transmits tuberculosis from the remains of ancient Egyptian mummies. And in 2011, scientists investigating a plague pit in the City of London were able to reconstruct the genome of Yersinia pestis, the bacterium responsible for the Black Death of the 14th century. It is thought the plague originated in China in around 1340, spreading west along the Silk Road, the caravan route running from Mongolia to the Crimea. In 1347, the plague reached the Mediterranean, and by 1400 it had killed in excess of 34 million Europeans, earning it the title, the Great Mortality. It was later historians who called it the Black Death. However, by far the greatest pandemic killer is influenza. Flu is constantly circulating between the southern and northern hemispheres. In North America and Europe, seasonal flus occur every autumn and winter. As the majority of children and adults will have been exposed to the virus in previous seasons, these illnesses are usually mild. However, every 20 to 40 years or so, the virus undergoes a dramatic mutation. Usually this occurs when a wild flu virus circulating in ducks and farm poultry meets a pig virus and they exchange genes. This process is known as antigenic shift and has occurred throughout human history. The first recorded pandemic occurred in 1580. The 18th and 19th centuries saw at least 6 further pandemics. In terms of mortality, none can compare with the Great Flu pandemic of 1918. The first indication of the pandemic came in the spring, when American troops in northern France began complaining of chills, headaches, and fever. Then, the following September, at a US Army barracks near Boston, soldiers started collapsing on parade, prompting their removal to the camp infirmary. As a surgeon there recalled, 2 hours after admission they have the mahogany spots over the cheekbones, and a few hours later you can begin to see the cyanosis extending from their ears and spreading all over the face. It is only a matter of a few hours then until death comes, and it is simply a struggle for air until they suffocate. On the SS Leviathan, a huge American transport en route to Bordeaux, sick men hemorrhaged blood from their noses, turning the decks between their bunks slick with bodily fluids. Meanwhile, British soldiers returning from northern France on furlough introduced the flu to Dover and other Channel ports, from where the virus was carried by rail to London. By the time the pandemic had run its course in April 1919, an estimated 675,000 Americans and 230,000 Britons were dead. In India alone, some 10 million were killed. And worldwide, the death toll was an astonishing 50 million. But that was then. Today, planes can transport viruses to any country on the globe in a fraction of the time it took in 1918. In February 2003, for instance, a Chinese doctor arrived at the Metropole Hotel in Hong Kong feeling unwell. Unknown to him, he was harboring a new animal origin virus called SARS, short for Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome. Within 24 hours of checking into room 913, 16 other guests had been infected, and over the following days, 5 boarded planes to overseas destinations, spreading the virus to Vietnam, Singapore, and Canada. Flights between Hong Kong, Toronto, and other international cities were quickly grounded, and thanks to other emergency measures, a pandemic was averted. By the time the outbreak was over 4 months later, SARS had infected 29 countries worldwide, and more than 1,000 people were dead. For all that the virus was rapidly contained, however, there was little that could be done about the alarming news reports carried by cable news channels and the internet. As bloggers added to the hysteria by spreading unfounded conspiracy theories, tourism in Hong Kong and other affected cities ground to a halt, costing businesses more than $10 billion. One business, however, did very well. Above all, SARS was a reminder that pandemics have always been associated with panic. If history teaches us anything, it is that while pandemics may start small, their impacts can be as dramatic as wars and natural disasters. The difference today is that science gives us the ability to detect pandemics right at the very beginning and to take action to mitigate their impacts before they spread too widely.